Hey, and welcome back to our series on Holy Week. Today we are looking at Thursday and what Jesus did on Thursday. Now, most of you are probably going to be more familiar with Thursday because, it's pretty popular and it's celebrated throughout the church as Maundy Thursday. But this is the day where Jesus would have celebrated Passover. He washed the disciples' feet. This is when the Garden of Gethsemane occurred, and of course when Jesus was arrested and his trials began. So we're just going to look at it. It's just going to be kind of a brief overview of each thing and just looking at like one major thing that came out of each one of these events as opposed to a thorough in-depth look at each one of these, because you could go on for hours and hours and do multiple studies on just each one of these events. So the first thing is Passover being celebrated. So we'll take a look at Matthew chapter 26, verses 26 to 30. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed, and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup and gave thanks, and he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So this is Jesus doing the Last Supper, and this is actually when communion is initiated or instituted and put into the church. And Jesus says, we should do this in remembrance of him, that as often as we do this, we are proclaiming his death. We're remembering his death, which is, of course, one of the most important things in all of Christendom. So the first thing that he does is he breaks the bread, he blesses it and gives it to him and says, "This is my body." Jesus is referred to as the bread of life. He's also referred to as the sacrificial lamb. Both of those are represented right here in the bread. And Jesus says, "Take my life, consume it, put it in you. Let my life be the life that is in you, flowing out of you." We say in the physical, you are what you eat, because when we eat things, we break down that food, the amino acids, everything becomes a part of the building blocks that build us as we grow. And spiritually, Jesus is saying you are what you eat. And what he wants is for us to eat his body, to take his life into us so that spiritually we grow to be like him. And Roger gave us a talk on Sunday called The Two Sides of the Cross. And I think it's a very powerful talk. I'm going to put a link to it below so I don't have to go into all of it because, it's long. But, he talks about the difference between the blood side of the cross and the body side of the cross, which brings us to the blood, where Jesus says, "This is my blood of the new covenant," which brings us forgiveness of sins. So first he gives us his life. His entire life belongs to us so that he can live his life through us. And then when he shed his blood, he gave us complete forgiveness of sins, not just forgiveness of sins, but forgiveness of our sin nature. Like we are totally wiped clean, forgiven, 100% pure. And then Jesus washes the disciples' feet. It says in John chapter 13 that after supper, Jesus, knowing all things and knowing that he would soon die, that the end was coming, it says he got up and he washed the disciples' feet. And I think it's very telling that Jesus, knowing that the end is here, knowing that, this is after everything, what he shows his disciples. And the commentary, because, there's some stuff that happens during the washing of the disciples' feet. And in John chapter 13, verses 12 through 17, Jesus gives commentary on what he just did and explains it. And so instead of me teaching it, I'm just going to read this because, Jesus says things better than I do. And so it says, "So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, 'Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sends him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.'" And Jesus is showing them that there is no task that is beneath us, that don't ever consider yourself to be above anything, and we're certainly never above anyone, that we can serve others. And blessed are we if we will look at ourselves as servants, never looking at ourselves to be the greatest or greater or more deserving, but rather that we are each other's servants, and we're here to serve. And that was so important to Jesus that, when we think of the greatest acts of Jesus, we think of the Last Supper, we think of the Garden of Gethsemane, of course, the crucifixion, the resurrection. Right in there, Jesus is purposeful and very intent on washing the disciples' feet. And so then we move in, it says, they had gone out to the Mount of Olives, so we get to the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is where Jesus prays for two things. Well, he prays for a lot of things, but two things in particular. The first is to let this cup pass from him. Jesus, in the physical, he does not want to go to the cross. He's willing, but he doesn't want to. And I did a message, not to promote my own talks, but I did a message on anxiety a couple Sundays ago where I talked about how Jesus actually, Jesus basically plays out Philippians 4, 6 through 7, or 7 and 8, Philippians 4, anyways, the be anxious for nothing passage. But actually what I should say is I think that passage was based on what Jesus was doing here, how he deals with his anxiety. He takes it to the Father. He gives him thanksgiving. He declares the Father's goodness and then submits to him, and he receives peace. Even though the answer to his prayer was not what he wanted, Jesus still receives peace, because the first thing Jesus does when he's dealing with facing the cross is he has to go to the Father and take his request to him. So I'll put a link to that description along with Roger's talk on the two sides of the cross down below, and you can check those out if you want to. And the other thing that Jesus prays for is he prays for unity. And he prays for all of us, because he prays for all those who will believe. He prays for his disciples, prays for those coming, prays for those in the future. And he prays that we will all come into unity, and that we will all love each other and be loved and just be in the Father and be in him, and for unity in the body of Christ. And I believe that one day that prayer of Jesus will be answered. And I believe that we're seeing steps towards it now. But one thing that we can do is we can see that since Jesus prayed for that, that's how important it was to him. That one of the last prayers he would pray on the earth would be for us to understand the Father's love, for us to love others with the Father's love, and to be in unity. And if we understand that, maybe we won't be so quick to judge people or so quick to break unity and to create divisions within the body of Christ or even with other people, to just love the way Jesus loved. And then we come to Jesus' arrest in the garden. And, people come out to him, and they come out to him with swords and clubs, and it's a big deal. And, Peter cuts off one of the guards' ears, and then Jesus stops everything and he heals that guy's ear. I think his name is like Matthias or something like that. Anyways, Jesus heals his ear. And, it's beautiful to see that in the midst of everything, Jesus never forgets who he is, that he's a healer, that he's love and he's peace. And he never resisted arrest. His disciples may have thrown up a little bit of a fit, but Jesus himself stays calm. But I love the entrance of the arrest. And I want to read it out of John 18, verses 4 through 6. It says, Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, he went forward and said to them, and the them is the people that came out to arrest him. He says, whom are you seeking? And they answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now, when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. I think that this was a tiny sample of the verse in Revelation that says, or in Thessalonians that says, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. When Jesus declares who he is in his real identity as the Son of God, and he just says, I am he, the power is there that every knee will bow. And we have that power now. We actually are able to stand in that same power to declare who Jesus is, and sickness will bow its knee, and death will bow its knee, and hopelessness and despair and loneliness will bow its knee. When we stand in our identity as joint heirs with Christ, and we declare who we are, and we declare who Jesus is, and we declare who God is, things will bow their knee the same way that those who came out to arrest him, who thought that they were the ones in control, who thought they were the ones bringing the force, the ones that came with weapons, and Jesus just speaks, and everyone falls to the ground in an act of worship, whether they wanted to be worshiping or not. I'm sure they didn't. They all do. Because that's who Jesus is. So this is Thursday. I want to encourage you, if you're watching this on Thursday, or whenever, but especially if you're watching this on Thursday. And I know last night technically was the start of Passover for the Jewish culture, but Maundy Thursday is the day, like back in the day when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. So I would encourage you to go ahead and grab something, take some communion, spend some time with God, take communion, remember the cross, remember his sacrifice for us. I'll see you tomorrow on Good Friday.